Ladylike Style, the Southern Cross Pacific News with Alex Perrottet, every Monday only on The Wire.
Are our affairs current?
Richard, great question.
The Wire.
You're on 95bFM. I'm Simon. I'm with you until 1 o'clock today. It's just gone 20 past 12. Now, in a moment, we'll be talking to Selwyn Manning from livenews.co.nz and 36parallel.com about what's called the Washington Declaration. I forgot to remind people you can text into the studio on 5395. Text costs 20 cents. Of course, we've just been talking to Kareem Ismail, an expat Egyptian PhD student at Auckland University, about how he sees events and political events unfolding in Egypt. Anyway, let's get Selwyn on the line. Selwyn, the Washington Declaration, what can you tell us about this?
Yeah, this came into effect yesterday, Simon. New Zealand's Defence Minister, Jonathan Coleman, he met with Leon Panetta, who is the United States' Secretary of Defence. The meeting took place at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., and there the two of them signed what is titled this Washington Declaration. What that declaration formalises in a military sense is a warming of foreign affairs and security relationships between New Zealand and the United States, Simon.
Is it ANZUS in drag, as I believe some people have suggested?
Well, it's getting pretty close to an ANZUS type of situation. There is a significant difference between the two. We need to remember that the ANZUS agreement was an alliance, the ANZUS alliance. And what that does is an alliance commits a country like New Zealand in advance of a situation developing in a security or military sense. This is a declaration, this Washington Declaration, and the declaration, it indicates a cooperation where common ground exists between mutually agreeable kind of countries like the United States and New Zealand. Both main parties in the Parliament, the National Party and the Labour Party, both agree that New Zealand and the United States and Australia, indeed Australia, have similar kind of values and similar kind of objectives and wants globally, generally, that is speaking. And so a declaration kind of fits in quite effectively in that respect.
But it's not quite the defence version of Casual Fridays, though.
It's not Casual Fridays. What this does do, let's look at very quickly the ANZUS alliance. It was a very solid pact, really, between the Australians, the United States, and New Zealand from the from the 1950s through, obviously, until our nuclear anti-nuclear laws prevented US warships from coming into New Zealand, based on the fact that the United States never confirms nor denies if they have nuclear weapons on board. So the ANZUS alliance was defunct at that juncture. What we've seen in recent times, obviously, and we went over this with the NATO signing only a couple of weeks ago, or last week, Simon, was that, in 2006 New Zealand began to rationalise and take part in the arguments on non-proliferation, particularly relating to North Korea. The United States noticed that, saw that New Zealand had worth, and ironically that our nuclear anti-nuclear stance actually had an advantage to its want to cool down that hotspot problem with North Korea. By 2008, Condoleezza Rice was down here representing the Bush regime and indicated that New Zealand was a very, very friendly ally, and an ally.
Winston Peters wasn't he?
Yeah, but he was the foreign minister representing New Zealand. You're quite right.
Yes,
there. They were good pals.
Exercising his charms on Ms. Rice.
2010, Hillary Clinton and John Key signed the Wellington Declaration. Now, that was a foreign affairs type of declaration that wedded the two countries strategically closer together. 2 weeks ago, John Key signs New Zealand up to a NATO security pact, and yesterday Coleman signs the Washington Declaration military pact. So there's a timeline here, and if you look on that timeline, you can see that things are pretty cosy and warm. What it means in real terms, well, from here we'll see more sharing of military intelligence, more forward strategies being shared, where the United States is intending to be going in the short and medium term. New Zealand will be privy to that, no doubt. More coordination of military force training between New Zealand, the United States, and the United States as allies. We've seen New Zealand in the cold pretty much for the first two decades after the 80s, so those kind of things warming up.
Now, you mentioned more training with US allies. Now, this is problematic at the moment. Now, I believe that members of Indonesian Special Forces, for instance, have been to New Zealand military schools.
Corpuses,
and these corpuses have actually been involved in atrocities in West Papua, I believe.
Absolutely.
Are we going to see more of that then?
We're going to see a cozying of these types of things where the United States leads the charge, and through its own diplomatic and foreign affairs kind of strategic moves, New Zealand naturally will be following that. Under the present government, it seems quite comfortable with going in that direction. Where that leaves New Zealand as an honest, independent broker on such things as its arguments on morality, well, it's putting its independence to the side, it appears, in my view, Simon, to a degree. When we see, for example, that we are assisting the training of significant people in the corpuses, for example, that, like you've rightly pointed out, have been instrumental in oppressing those in West Papua, well, then it really undermines New Zealand's human rights independent brand. There's no way of looking at that in any alternative kind of spin. Just does not really gel. At the end of the day, it seems wrong. The United States argued its engagement with Indonesia and Indonesia's military from a point of view of long-term strategy, and what it was going on about there was that the closer it gets to training up people within the Indonesian forces, the more control it has over the way and means of which they go about their work in the next phase of it. To put it in another way, if the United States gets on with the corpuses, it believes it can kind of influence an outcome as far as the way they go about their business in places like West Papua.
That's pretty astonishingly naive, I would think, given that the Americans, for instance, have for generations had the School of the Americas, and that didn't really seem to have any effect on curbing the behaviour of the South American regimes that sent their troops to be schooled there in torture.
And in many cases, the United States was actually aligning itself to the more totalitarian and brutal regimes in South America. I agree with you on those principles. I mean, this is the whole thing, that where New Zealand gets into these military alliances where it starts to diminish its independent moral arguments, well, then there is a consequence to that, and it gives us a position of irrelevance, in a sense, on those grounds. Clearly, the United States' interests in Indonesia are one, that Indonesia is a growing and burgeoning power. It's hugely militarily influential around the Southeast Asia region, and the United States has commercial interests in the mines in some of the outer provinces and territories of Indonesia, which West Papua are included. So those are the self-interest aspects, that really drive these types of things. New Zealand, this alliance, they're saying, is involving New Zealand forces in more US-led peacekeeping and peacemaking operations, and also stepping up New Zealand. I think we'll see New Zealand stepping up more to the podium and ceding Western alliance interests as opposed to the independent kind of humanitarian one specific to New Zealand's argument in the past. It may be different under a Labour-led government. In an interview with Phil Goff recently, Phil Goff expressed to me very strongly the need for New Zealand to maintain its independent brand. He was quite comfortable with the NATO signatory. How comfortable Labour is with the Washington Declaration, I guess time will tell.
And how transparent do you think any cooperation will be between New Zealand and America and its allies?
Well, these types of things generally, the real good oil is usually kept classified and behind the scenes. What we do know is classified intelligence information was shared between the United States, Australia and Britain, and to a lesser degree Canada. We know that New Zealand was pretty much out in the cold for a long time. We can see that the United States has made efforts to kind of sell the idea that New Zealand is now inside the glove, if you like, of that Five Nations, Five Eyes kind of arrangement that runs there, and YOPI is a part of that network, Echelon, etc. So what it means is probably some and probably more significant intelligence sharing goes on, but that's all locked in behind one, our SIS, the external assessments kind of roles that the agencies have, the GCSB, which is the Government Security Communications Bureau, and the DPMC, which is the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet down in Wellington. All of those bodies are the ones that really contain the the information, what you and I get out of it as far as information sharing is zilch, Simon.
Right, so looking forward, are there any situations, do you think, where we'll see New Zealand troops deployed on the ground again? Now, we're in Afghanistan, we're getting out of Afghanistan.
Yeah, just remember, I suppose to answer that, we could address the point that was made at NATO by the NATO Secretary-General, and that was that where there is a conflict that develops like Afghanistan did, the signing of these pacts makes it easier to engage countries like New Zealand on the ground sooner rather than later. Remember that when Afghanistan was developing in the 2000s, under a Labour-led government, New Zealand was reticent to be seen to be sending its SAS troops in a combat role early on. What these pacts do is that reshuffles the cards, and New Zealand SAS combat troops would be there at the ground zero.
Now, just going back to ANZUS for a moment, I heard one argument the reason we got out of ANZUS wasn't so much the nuclear issue, but it meant New Zealand could opt out of basically buying a whole heap of really expensive equipment. We didn't have to maintain such a large force because we didn't have to, send ships on patrols with other ships, squadrons overseas, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Is this the natural result of ANZUS, decades on, is that the way we contribute to international affairs like this is that we basically all we can do is intelligence share and chip in packets of troops and.
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. Yeah, going back to the ANZUS thing and the true reasons, there's obviously multiple reasons, multiple advantages, multiple disadvantages that always come in when something changes in that way. And at that time, New Zealand was very, very much pulled in a sense of being able to demonstrate it had combat facilities, meaning the hardware was there, whether it be troops, whether it be naval kind of hardware or Air Force. That changed, and now with the signing of those white defence papers that strategically position New Zealand closer to Australia, there's a coordinated strategy where, Australia has an offensive kind of designed defence force. New Zealand is more logistical, more regionally appropriate, and more peacekeeping and natural disaster orientated. That works in well and fitting in with the Australian apparatus, if you like. So New Zealand, will it kind of face extra costs in trying to develop combat roles in a hardware sense? Probably not. Whether or not our more closer allies now, like the United States, put a few things our way at a cheap cost, well, that remains to be seen. Are we going to see US naval ships here in our harbours again? Well, let's put a question mark around that. To do that, there would need to be one of two changes. One, New Zealand changes its anti-nuclear stance and its laws. That would be a hard sell for any government. Or two, the United States actually has to change its neither confirm nor deny policies, and that seems a long shot as well. So I think in the medium term, let's look at it in that way, I don't think we would see new US naval, nuclear-powered naval ships here in our harbours yet.
Great. Well, Selwyn, thank you for your time once again, and we will talk to you next week.
Okay, mate. Take care.
Bye.
When I'm watching the news, I don't really, there's a person talking to me, telling me what's going on, and I don't really listen to what they're saying.